I don't think it's just Taylor. I think the whole Bengals coaching staff belongs on this list. It's the pressure's on them now, which is exactly where the players and the fans all want it to be. When you have talent in a roster that you're comfortable with and believe in, it's a great place to be. But that just means that the pressure is then on the coaching staff.
Zac Taylor hot seat? According to CBS Sports, Zac Taylor, one of 5 NFL head coaches that entered this season on the hot seat. And on one hand, I think it could make some sense. 24 and 27 over the past 3 seasons, especially after the Bengals added what they've added. At the same time, I think Joe Burrow really bullish on Zac Taylor, the Bengals loyal. He's got multiple years left on his contract. Are you guys buying it? Do you think Zac Taylor's seat is hot going into this season?
Yes, I 100% buy.
Yeah.
You can't miss the playoffs again in the Joe Burrow era. You've already missed it 3 in a row going into the season. And I was a little bit surprised on this list that Zac only comes in at number 4. I honestly thought he should have been higher.
Yeah, so he was 4th on the list according to CBS Sports, and we can dive into the quote that Jordan broke down for CBS Sports in a minute. But just to give you guys the other coaches, Dan Quinn 5th, which I think is really interesting, and it makes sense in a lot of ways. And then Shane Steichen of the Colts, Todd Bowles of the Bucks, and then number 1. And this one goes without saying, I think, is Aaron Glenn with the Jets. It was just really rough for the Jets last year. So of those teams, I certainly think the Bengals have the highest expectations for sure this year. And so that's what's interesting that Zac Taylor comes in 4th.
I imagine Zac Taylor would have been on the hot seat a couple years ago if this offseason had happened a couple years ago. I think such a big conversation around Taylor over the time here is that he calls the plays on the offense, and the offense has been incredibly successful for the most part when everyone's been healthy and on the field. The defense hasn't had the talent to give them a real chance to be competitive. That's been the conversation around this Bengals team all 3 years that they've missed the playoffs for the most part. And with Taylor now having the talent on the defense, missing the playoffs 3 years in a row, I don't know if you can hang on to any of that anymore. I think now it's time for the players to stay healthy, do their job, play well throughout a 17-game season, and the coaches to coach. And that's what it comes down to at this point. And I don't think it's just Taylor. I think the whole Bengals coaching staff belongs on this list. It's the pressure's on them now, which is exactly where the players and the fans all want it to be. When you have talent in a roster that you're comfortable with and believe in, it's a great place to be. But that just means that the pressure is then on the coaching staff.
Exactly. There's too much talent, to your point, on this roster, especially on the offensive side. Yeah. But now it's matching on the defensive side with the offseason that they've had, the names that they've brought in. We're at the point where there's no more excuses can be made for this team if they're not back. And I'm not even going to say just back in the playoffs. Like, they need to make another playoff run. Like, if they make it as a wild card or are eliminated that first week, I would still consider this coaching staff to be on the hot seat. You can't just, make the playoffs and then lose that first game.
I agree. You got to win one.
Sure. Yeah. I get it. I think context is always needed with these things.
Of course.
But on the surface, for sure. Jordan Dajani of CBS Sports is the one that released this list, and he said, or wrote, quote, "To put it bluntly, the Bengals are wasting an opportunity with an elite quarterback in Burrow and an elite wide receiver in Jamar Chase. Burrow is the only quarterback in NFL history to post a passer rating of at least 100 without a playoff start over a 3-season span. Chase, meanwhile, is the best receiver in the NFL. Randy Moss is the only other wideout to record 1,000 receiving yards and at least 7 touchdowns in each of a player's first 5 seasons." Look, yes, we know that. It goes without saying. We've said it for years now. Like, it feels like they're wasting Joe. It feels like they're wasting Jamar. And I think that's why this front office made the push to tie it all together. They made the push. They made the trade for Dexter Lawrence. They did all of these things because they didn't want the built-in excuse of we don't have enough talent. Joe Burrow, we've heard him about 7 different ways say how he feels like they have enough, everything they need. And I don't think he felt that way the past couple of years. I think Zac Taylor, Joe, they all looked in the mirror and they're like, all right, well, what do we need? The front office got it done. So now it's up to them to go prove it. And that does start with Zac Taylor. And so is there pressure? Absolutely. There's always pressure when expectations are high.
Yeah.
And so when I see this list, expectations for the Bengals are higher than the rest of these teams. If Aaron Glenn wins 7 games for the Jets this year, it's a huge success. If Zac wins 7 games, it's one of the most, one of the most disappointing seasons in Bengals history. And so that's where the standard is. That's where the expectation is certainly different for the Bengals than some of these other teams because of what they've done this offseason, the quarterback they have and the receiver they have.
Yeah.
I think this conversation's all exacerbated a little bit this offseason, too, by the other three coaches in the AFC North changing. Two of those coaches, Tomlin and Harbaugh, have won the division since Taylor last made the playoffs. And I think a lot of people were surprised when the Ravens and the Steelers made those moves, not just because Harbaugh and Tomlin had been on those sidelines for a long, long time, but because the names that were thrown out for the vast majority of the season to be changed in the AFC North were Zac Taylor and Kevin Stefanski. And to go into this season with Taylor as the lone returning head coach in the AFC North with a roster that I think most people would say is right up there talent-wise with the rest of the AFC North, and really has been over the last couple of years as well when the Bengals haven't been making the playoffs. It's all on his shoulders now. And I don't know whether that's entirely fair. I think the explanations of how seasons end and the context is all super important, and obviously we won't have that until the end of the season. But even with injuries or anything along those lines, I don't know how much you can take off of Zac Taylor's plate this year, or the coaching staff as a whole. I certainly don't think it's necessarily fair to just put it on Taylor. It is an entire coaching staff. But I do feel like at some point, and it's the same conversation with the Reds falling apart with injuries over the last couple of months, you have to get to a point where a couple injuries here or there don't derail your season. And I understand if Joe Burrow misses 10 games or something like that, a huge chunk, it's a completely different conversation. But if he's going to miss 3 or 4, this is a team that you've seen that happen before. You have to be prepared and you have to be ready to attack that and stay afloat. And I think part of that is re-signing Joe Flacco and having him ready to go. They're trying to set up some safety guards for a lot of these things, but all those excuses are gone now, and this team just has to perform.
Yeah, completely agree. And especially when I look at this list, and obviously it was not great in New York last year for the Jets and Aaron Glenn, but I don't know. I feel like Zac Taylor and this coaching staff should be kind of right up there. Like, I think it's 1A, 1B for the sense of just the expectations for this team are through the roof with how much talent is there. It's Joe Burrow's prime. You've missed the playoffs the last 3 seasons, and assuming Burrow is healthy, that the majority of, this team stays healthy and there's not, like, to your point, like a major injury that, could derail the season. I feel like he's so on the hot. This coaching staff is so on the hot seat that they should be 1 or 2 on this list.
One thing that was entirely frustrating for me last season was the move for the Bengals from Lou Anarumo to Al Golden, and really at no time did I feel like I ever learned anything necessarily about Al Golden.
Sure.
I didn't feel like there was enough talent on the defense to truly grade a new scheme and a new defensive coordinator. So now you're rolling into a year where the expectation is a Super Bowl, the expectation is contention, and it's essentially year 1. I know it's year 2, but the talent being so far away where it was over the last 3 years is a huge problem, and I think that does roll into at least the first couple weeks of this year. You shouldn't have had to go out and get that many additions that you're requiring to be instant impact players, because a couple of those should have happened in the last off seasons prior. So punting on the last few off seasons has really hurt the Bengals, but they made up for it by going all in this year. I wonder if it could lead to a relatively slow start on the defense as those guys all mesh together. But regardless, the front office certainly did their job, and now it's a fair way to grade these coaches.
And yeah, the fact that they move on from Lou, and last year it was TJ Slayton and Oren Burks.
Yeah.
And those are the big additions.
Right.
I get why. As frustrating as it is, I get why they weren't like, oh, let's fire Al. I mean, that was a big discussion last year during the season among fans. It's like, oh, well, get rid of Al. He clearly doesn't know what he's doing. It's like, well, he's got rookie linebackers, has a defensive line that isn't getting pressure. Trey Hendrickson's out, and that's been a distraction. Like, there's been a lot of reasons why. And so I totally understood sticking by Al, who was clearly Zach's guy. You're keeping Zach. Joe very much in Zach's corner. Makes sense. I understand why you wouldn't want a scapegoat, and that's how it would have felt, I think, in Joe's mind. Zac Taylor, had you fired him last year. But now that you've made these moves, now that you've added everything, I agree with you, Marisa. The more I think about it, like, Aaron Glenn, who cares if he wins 5 games? The Jets don't have a quarterback. Like, they have a Geno Smith. Like, why would he be? His hot seat needs to be, like, how buttoned up the team is, not whether or not they're winning games, because they're not going to win. Jets, you're going to lose a bunch of games this year, and you should have lost one more last year, but the Bengals are so embarrassing on defense, and Geno Stone keeps missing tackles. That's the issue. It's like expectations are where they're, like, Dan Quinn should probably be higher, because the Washington Commanders spent a bunch of money to make sure that they had a much better defense. They went and got him guys that fit his defense. So guess what? They should be better this year. They should be a playoff team, and if they're not, he probably should be fired. I think Zac Taylor's in a similar situation, and the reason it's even more different, sense of urgency, all of those things, is because he's been here since 2019 now. And if you go 4 straight years without making the playoffs, or 4 straight years without winning a playoff game, or 4 straight years in the Joe Burrow era where you're not a Super Bowl contender, that never happened in Tom Brady's career. That never happened in Peyton Manning's career. That never happened and hasn't happened and probably won't happen in Patrick Mahomes' career. That's the standard with these elite quarterbacks. You have to find a way to get back to that level.
Absolutely, and I think a huge conversation that has been avoided, and we touched on it a little bit earlier this week and late last week, is that there's so much conversation about the offense taking a step back as well over the last few years, and that has been completely ignored because of how rough the defense has been statistically. I mean, the worst defense in the league over the last 2 years, and that has taken all of the conversation. It seems like Zac Taylor calling the offense has skated by with the defense and talent excuse for a long time, or explanation, I think is the better word there, for a long time now, and the offense isn't where it was when he was the best play caller in the league, or at least in that discussion. So I think there's a lot of conversation on that going into this year as well. The offense is his baby. He calls those plays. He needs to get it back to where it was when they were a highly explosive offense, where they were taking the deep shots, where they had a relatively effective run game. And I think we saw that a little bit towards the end of last year, but hopefully that can progress again this year.
Where does panic kind of lie if, let's say, the team does kind of get off to a slow start, which they've done, you know, over the last few years? Maybe it takes a few weeks for the defense to kind of gel, and let's say this team is sitting around 500 either before or after that Ravens game. Where does panic kind of lie? And it, not only maybe just like the fan base, but James, from your perspective of like, at that point, like, do the Bengals consider making a change in some way, or do you just kind of try to keep riding it out, hopefully hoping things would like kind of make a turn?
I think if they're healthy, they'll ride it and navigate it, because they have. They always default back to, and they did it in 2024, to what happened in 22. Oh, we've been there. We've been here. We won 8 straight regular season games and then 2 playoff games. We won 10 straight. And they started to do it in 2023, and they were rallying, and then they lose to Houston, and then Joe gets hurt 4 days later. So, like, I think they always default to that. Having your back against the wall like that, though, that pressure stinks. That's a really tough spot. And there's only so many times, very few teams can do what they did in 22. And so to keep going back to that and saying, oh, we've been there, we've been in these positions, and that, you can hear Zach, like he says, that's what he's going to say. Avoid that position. Find a way to not be in that position. If they're 3-3, I think a lot of people have them starting around 3-3. It's going to stink, and there's going to be pressure, and they're going to have to respond the right way. Just don't start 3-3. Get to that 4-2 mark. And it's such a difference. There's such a gap, even though it's just one game. 4-2 versus 3-3, just on vibes and feel. And if they do that, then I think they'll be fine. They should be good. And I think Zac Taylor is a good coach. But if he goes out there and struggles this year, and they do struggle 3-3, do I think they make a change? No, but I not mid-season. But I do think at some point, if you keep playing with fire and get off to these slow starts, you're not going to be able to find your way out of it, even if they do have the talent this year that they didn't have in 2024.
But essentially was the case in 24. I mean, obviously the injury for sure, but the slow start is what, I mean, the first 2 games were fine, but the slow start with Burrow is what ended up ending the season. You go perfect at the end and you still can't get in. I think that should have been the telltale sign that this is not a sustainable way to go about, attacking the playoffs. And hopefully, that's assessed and changed this year. I think one thing that's a little bit encouraging is that week 1 opponent, hot seat, is ranked higher than Zac Taylor. Todd Bowles on this list as well. So a lot of pressure on the Bucs with a lot of contract issues. So hopefully Bengals can pick one up in week 1 and we don't have to worry about the slow start.